Welcome to the UP College of Education's webinar series on education resilience and learning continuity in the time of COVID-19. Thank you for choosing to spend your precious time with us today. I hope that you will find this session useful and meaningful. My name is Dina Ocampo, and it is my pleasure to present this part of the white paper written by Task Force Educación of the University of the Philippines College of Education. The task force is led by our Dean, Professor Jerome Buenviaje, and our chairperson, Professor Sherilyn Carrion Monterola. The white paper presents key strategies that could mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on education. The conceptualization process was guided by three principles, namely compassion, inclusion, innovation. Needless to say, these are abstract terms which we must unpack so we can mindfully and deliberately observe them in every action of every actor involved in the wellness and health, teaching and learning, leadership, governance, and research components of education. Essentially, the white paper offers some adaptive strategies, which could potentially demonstrate empathy, sympathy for, and solidarity with learners as well as education workers who are feeling the impact of the pandemic and other exacerbating circumstances. 8 key strategies are discussed in the paper. As you might know, the webinars for strategies 1 and 2 on prioritizing teacher and student safety, health, and well-being, and recalibrating curricular and assessment priorities have already been conducted. You can visit the FB page or YouTube channel of the UP College of Education if you were unable to participate in those webinars. The videos are there for you to access. In the next weeks, there will be 11 more webinars to elaborate on the other key strategies. I hope that you will also be able to join us for those. The COVID-19 pandemic may result in a long-term loss of access to education, which will lead to higher dropout rates. But there are also invisible consequences. For example, there may be increased vulnerability of children to hunger, violence, psychological hardship, and emotional challenges. In combination, these strategies that you see on the framework, these are carefully selected so that it will guide the way for education movers to provide learners with knowledge and skills that will help them cope with the adverse effects of a health pandemic. Education in schools provide children at risk with security and protection. Programs that we have in schools, such as feeding programs, these give the poorest children nourishment they need for the day. The social environment in school gives neglected children the care and attention they crave from teachers and classmates. During the aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan or Yolanda or Ondoy, children who had lost their families to the floods found themselves wandering towards their schools or to the homes of their teachers and principals, looking for refuge and security, food and comfort. They went to them for help. Equally important reasons are the following. Education processes establish a sense of connection and community. Lessons will provide children and youth a purpose for their day, a target to accomplish. Progress in their activities will communicate to them that there is hope despite these challenges. And it will also tell children that adults are exerting efforts to make sure that their future is secure. Finally, COVID-19 and other disasters should not override the rights of learners to education. Indeed, the most vulnerable children, education is their lifeline. And so efforts must be made for education services to continue during the pandemic while following health protocols. Today, we will cover the key strategy on enacting flexible learning options, or FLOs. This overview is only one of the webinars in this strand. There will be 3 other sessions with Professors Lenny Ke and John Paul Maligali. They will be sharing about strategies and technologies such as indigenous resources and low technologies for remote and blended learning. They will be also sharing in another webinar high technologies for remote learning. And they will be sharing blended learning teaching strategies in another one. And so they will pack these 3 webinars with teaching strategies, activities, which you can use for your classes. We hope that you can make time to join them for these upcoming webinars. Before we proceed, let us first level off on learning delivery. According to the handbook released by the Department of Education on the Alternative Learning Systems Education and Skills Training Program, learning delivery comprises means and resources used to structure the learning experience. Essentially, it is an arrangement used to enable students to access the curriculum and education activities and services. For most children, the learning delivery system that they are knowledgeable about or they know is schooling. But at this time, we must assume that learning delivery will not revert to pre-pandemic mechanisms and practices. We have to move forward towards flexible learning options because the constraints of this health pandemic will not allow us to go back to school all at the same time again. And I don't think this is going to be possible for a few more months. So it's very important for flexible learning options to be designed, developed, and delivered. Next, let's just step back a little bit more and talk about what is flexible. As you can see, flexible is being able to bend or be bent easily without breaking, just like bamboo. It has the capacity to change or be changed easily according to the situation. And I think this is the core adjective that we must operationalize and observe in the various learning options that will be designed for learners. Related to the word flexible are other terms, for example, adaptive, adjusted, negotiated, transacted. These are words that are important for developing flexible learning options. The tensions and challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic has led to school closures all over the Philippines and the world. But education cannot remain closed. We need to find ways for learning to continue. Teachers and school leaders must slowly but surely navigate the gaps created by the disruptions. Learning expectations, methods, resources, environments need to be made pliable. So interventions will first and foremost, reach the learners and strengthen them so that they feel that they are progressing. In the white paper that we developed, 7 strategies to enact flexible learning options are specified. Any combination can be captured in programs to make them responsible for learner needs. So none of this is prescriptive. There are actually things to consider, and combinations of them may be done so that particular options become designed that are responsive to one situation, because that option may not actually be the best one for another. So another location or another group of learners might need another kind of flexible learning option, which is why these 7 strategies need to be thought about and need to be unpacked a little bit so that we are guided on how to put them together. So the 7 are: create flexible learning options, select appropriate learning delivery modalities, combine educational technologies, explore varied learning resources, rethink times for learning, adopt rotational shifts, and provide standards for flexible learning options. So let's go to the first one. The first strategy is to create flexible learning options. Flexible learning is a teaching and learning arrangement which may be preferred or needed by the students. It is a choice that should be available in any educational system. However, at this point in our history, it is a necessity. It is necessary. The Department of Education, in fact, has a range of flexible learning options available. On its Department Order 21, series of 2019, the following FLOs were enumerated: the project impact, the instructional management by parents, community, and teachers, open high, night high, modified in-school, off-school approach, homeschooling, Kariton classroom, and similar programs like Balsa Basa, and of course, the alternative learning system. The mechanism of the ALS system is an important mechanism which can be adapted to children, because ALS is designed for out-of-school youth and adults. But the mechanism there can very easily be brought to school-age learners if we are able to arrive at the degrees of flexibilities that will be included in the learning programs that can be developed. In relation to these available FLOs, the first action would be to review and modify these programs to suit current demands. We can draw from prior experiences, actually. We have had education disruptions before, during typhoons, earthquakes, political upheavals, military conflict. And I think these disruptions have taught us lessons on how to help children in these situations. First, we secure their safety. Then next, we try to bring them back to a routine so that they know that life goes on. And then we help them cope with this situation, with the anxiety and so on, while at the same time helping them move forward. These are experiences that we have, and we must bring these experiences into the COVID-19 situation, because we're not exactly clueless about it. However, this is actually perhaps the first time that it is happening nationwide. So this is a very important distinction that we must recognize. So this is how we must review and modify these programs. We learn from what we know and adapt it to the magnitude that is confronting us now. Flexible learning is learner-centered. We need to understand learner data. Why? Because flexible learning as a response to diversity, inclusion, and equity. It is primarily learner-centered, so students can access the curriculum, education, and learning. The design and delivery must be responsive to their needs. Some strategies ensure learner-centeredness. For example, magkumustahan, collect the learner data through kumustahan, but also because we want to understand their context. Their data will guide in deciding on flexible learning options. Find out what they need first and foremost. Are they hungry? Are they sick? Do they have shelter? And if these are not answered for, then I think it's very important for us to find people who will help them immediately. Um, that is more important than bringing them learning materials. You know what we people have been saying over and over again: Maslow before Bloom. But in analyzing or studying their data, use technology to bring Bloom and Maslow to them. You know, it's very important for us to use whatever technologies are available to us so that we can make things more effective and efficient. We also need to find out, do they have a place where they can study? What time? And with whom? Will their parent be able to teach them, their lola? Do they have learning partners in their community, or will their siblings be able to help? We also need to find out what technologies they have at their disposal. We need to make an inventory of the applications that they can use. Find out what they miss about school and what they want to learn. Learner data is really the basis for decision making, and it's decision making on certain aspects of education or learning delivery. I will discuss those aspects in a little while. Teachers should develop the skill of customizing the lesson for individuals or small groups. And I think this is the challenge because most teachers are used to teaching whole classes. Now, in learning flexibilities, we need to be able to create lessons that are suited to smaller groups of children. Second, flexible learning means flexible teaching. In fact, flexible learning cannot happen without flexible teachers. We need to consider the capacities of teachers and schools. An inventory of these capacities will help very much in the planning of the interventions. But first and foremost, again, we need to find out, are the teachers okay? Are their families safe? Are their families well? Do they have technologies they can use? Again, we need to be able to match learner technologies, teachers technologies, because this will be now a nice venue for finding where flexible learning can reside, where flexible learning can happen. The points of convergence between learners' needs and what teachers and schools can provide is key to successful flexible learning options. We need to use these information to decide on hallmarks of learning delivery: time, place, pace, process, and evidence of learning. We need to be able to select strategies and tools that are suitable for flexible learning, but we must also help teachers gain these strategies and tools or strengthen their use of these strategies and tools. We must not assume that they know it all at the same level. We have to level off and we have to harness and foster and nurture competence in teachers. This way, their understanding and embracing of their new roles and responsibilities will also mature. I suppose what I want to emphasize also in this slide is that the overlap between teachers and learners, competencies, capacities, needs, and abilities need to overlap a lot, because the greater the overlap, that means that there are more points of convergence and they are able to communicate better. And I think this is very important. Now, these are the aspects of education delivery I was referring to earlier. When we talk about flexible learning options, we need to know what are we going to be flexible about. A couple of weeks ago, people already conducted the seminars or webinars rather that have to do with curriculum and assessment. I will be touching on them a little here, but they've already discussed this at great length. No? But content is an aspect that needs to be discussed. The content to be learned will have to be flexible also, because we cannot assume that every other delivery mechanism will be the same. So in terms of content, it's really about curriculum and languages of learning. We need content that is reachable, that students can actually digest and process and create for it to become productive. And this content, therefore, this has to be delivered at a time and a place. Children will have to decide when and where are they going to study. How will assignments be submitted? When will they do their learning activities? When and where will they use laboratories? What are their times dedicated for learning? Because at some point, children will need to have a routine for learning, but this routine must also be synchronous with their families, or have a good relationship with the family routine, because they have to adjust to each other. We have seen children who are studying on the rooftop because that's where they get signal, or studying under a lamppost because they don't have electricity at home. These are real conditions that the Filipino child faces. So it's very important for us to be flexible in, in what we give them, in what content we expect them to learn, because we don't know when and where they will do the learning. The other thing is space. We might need to reconsider how fast or how slow we expect the learning to happen. Pace includes issues like how long in a day do they have to study? What kinds of activities can they do? What processes are they going to do? What activities are they going to do? And of course, with what resources are they going to do that? The pace of study is also important, because if in a regular classroom setup, it takes you, for example, 2 days to teach uh, place value for one's place value. For remote learning or distance learning, it might take you longer than that, because really the supervision is not there. If there is supervision, then the supervision levels vary from child to child. The other thing is that perhaps it might be difficult for some children to get themselves to learn. They may not have that agency. In school, children sort of shepherd each other along, right? They encourage each other to do the tasks. They also distract each other, but most of the time they encourage each other to do it. This time the child is relying on his or her own agency. And we want lessons that children can do. We don't want lessons that parents will stress about, and then they will be angry at their child and disappointed in their child and cause conflict at home. We want lessons that will bring them together. We want lessons that will make learning a family thing, because that is what it's supposed to be, engagement with learning. We're not here looking for who's better, who gets the higher grade. That's not what we're looking for. Here, we're looking for helping each other. Sympathy, empathy, solidarity. This is what we're looking for. Inclusion, compassion, innovation. And so the more collective the learning can be, even in the home, especially now, that is preferred. So it's very important for pace and process to be sympathetic to the situation of families and children. Finally, evidence of learning is about how children and parents know that the kids are actually learning the lesson. What are the benchmarks? For example, how do I know that my child already knows how to add single digits? What are the benchmarks for that? And as a teacher, how will you know if the student can do it? Will you do a pop quiz through cell phone one day? Will you do it an oral exam like that? Or will you do it face to face through a chat facility, a video chat facility? What are the gateways? If the child is able to do all the 10 worksheets, can he or she go to the next one if all of them are already perfect or 80% correct? What about the 20% not correct? What happens to that? So these are things that need to be explicit. Explicit assessment is necessary because your processes in flexible learning have been explicit as well. So the ways to demonstrate learning must also be very clear so that parents know what to watch out for. And you, as a teacher from a remote location, also knows what to watch out for. And finally, a word about ratings. I think this is the time to sort of relax and chill about grades. Let's not add to the anxiety. The first webinar we had talked about how do we protect health and wellness. And the first strategy is to do no harm. Let's not add to the anxiety and distress of families and to your own anxiety as well. Let there be awards for achievement. Let them know when they are achieving. But let's not be hung up on marks or scores. Let it be performance. Let it be an output rather than a test score. Let's not teach remotely, assess face to face. Let's not do that. What we need to do is children creating things, doing projects, because these are things that they can show you later that they have done. And so the rating can actually be more participatory as well. Children can say, I think I did a very good job on this project. And so I deserve a high mark on this project. Another child might say, Mama had to help me with this project. So maybe I get a 7 out of 10. So these ratings have to be flexible also. And therefore, if the ratings are flexible, we are more inclusive. And essentially, flexible ratings are more innovative as well. Again, it is very important for us to be able to demonstrate that the flexible learning option can bend, can change, because we want learners to be engaged. To reiterate, it is a realistic and sensible combination of flexibilities which makes learning attainable. There is no need to deviate completely from what learners are used to doing in school. If they're used to doing drills, give them some drills. That's okay. They don't have to all of a sudden all go online. What's important is for you to be able to balance their activities. Here's an example. The times for learning can be completely flexible, meaning it's a decision children and families make. The place can be negotiated. For example, you can say that, okay, for this particular activity, you need to do it by yourself in a place in your house. That can be negotiated. It can also be completely flexible. But in this example, let us make it negotiated. And then you fixed it. You're the teacher. You are introducing the lesson. You are doing the presentation lesson. So the children will have to either watch TV or watch you on a video, download it from YouTube or whatever, and you've fixed it. You're the one who's going to do it. And then you've also fixed the follow-up activity. Everybody's going to answer the same worksheet. But their assessment can be flexible. For example, they can submit it to you after 3 days or sooner. Or the activity or the assessment activity is actually a portfolio. So this means that you will receive different kinds of portfolios, or you will receive different kinds of projects. So it is more flexible. And children have the flexibility, can have the flexibility to do it with another. In other words, they can ask for help from their teacher or from their parent or from their sibling or from their grandparents. And that's their option. And all they need to do is to report that to you so that you can consider that when you give them marks or you give them feedback or when you give them the next lesson. So I hope this clarifies what we mean by flexible learning options. You can design the flexibilities, and please design it according to the learners. You know, you might say this is making several lesson plans in one go. It's actually one lesson plan with different levels of flexibility. And if you look at the daily lesson log or the daily lesson plan, it's actually part of it that you prepare for different ability and competency levels of your students. Here, it's not just the competency that you are considering. What you are considering are available technologies, the capacities to learn, your own available technologies, and so on. So I think that this is not completely new, but we need to harness our abilities to do this so we become successful. The second action recommended in the white paper is to select appropriate learning delivery modalities. Before we go to a definition of a learning delivery modality, let me just define a learning modality. A learning modality is the avenue through which information is received by a learner. Obviously, we want to engage more senses so that the learning is more robust. Learning delivery modality, on the other hand, is how the information is sent out to the learner. So the learning delivery modality is outward. The learning modality is how it processes it inward the learner. So the appropriate modalities we want are those that are matched to the children's learning modalities, their developmental level, and as I've said earlier, their resource availability. Because it would be fun if more than one sense is activated during a learning situation. For example, if we want a learner to see, touch, smell, and taste a fraction, then we could probably use a buko pie or a pizza as a learning or teaching device. In that way, we are able to use a learning delivery modality that the children can appreciate more because it activates their senses. Now, this is the kind of interaction between receiving and sending information that we are trying to do, even as we enter into 3 learning modalities that have already been identified in the white paper. The first one is the most commonly used learning modality, learning delivery modality, which is face-to-face instruction. Face-to-face yung Dragonfly School. Yeah. So content and learning materials are taught in person. The teacher and the learner are in the same place at the same time. So when they communicate and collaborate, it's happening there together. No? And this allows for live interaction. It allows them immediate feedback. And so for most of us, this is the kind of instruction we receive all our lives. So it's very important for us to acknowledge that this is where we're coming from. This is the experience we're bringing in. And a small number of us actually have experience in the next one. remote or distance learning. This is sometimes mostly used in higher ed, but you know, this is also used in basic ed. Um, oops, sorry. Let me just go forward. Okay. Remote learning is the modality where students and teachers are physically separated. Um, Learners will tend to rely on their abilities to read and write and count and compute to be able to do lessons independently. So it's crucial for learners to be able to do a measure of independent learning and independent study. So we must be very cautious on who to expect to do remote or distance learning. For those who are unable to do remote or distance learning on their own, we might need to engage and rope in their families, teach their family the lesson, and then so the family can be the direct instructor of the child. And that's important. That's still remote distance learning, except you have a conduit to the child. Whereas if you use learning materials that are written for a child to do on his or her own time and pace, and the child can read that, that's okay if the child is capable. But if the child isn't, we need a conduit to that. Or we need to organize learning communities, small learning communities to help children. Now, we need good and well-designed learning materials to do this. Hopefully, they are varied and they are multimedia as well. And for me, it is very crucial that we will use ICT for communication and educational transactions. We can't leave them on their own, right? We need to continue to communicate with our learners. However, a good way to mediate is to build into learning modules self-assessment activities. We don't have to call them that. We can call them fun names as check yourself or see what you've learned, you know? and 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 let children see na, oops, I need to review before I go to the next lesson. I need to hit a benchmark before I move to the next lesson. Or I need to discuss with my teacher on the phone so that I can tell her what I learned and I can clarify what I didn't understand, and so she can teach me again. And I think this is a very important mechanism. We need to use communication even if they are far. And so for places that have easy signal and communication facilities, that's not so hard to do. But when children are physically in places that have poor signal, then teacher and student will have to negotiate on how they are going to communicate. The third and final learning delivery modality is blended learning. And blended learning, there you go. Blended learning is a combination of face-to-face instruction and computer-mediated instruction. Another definition is to use face-to-face instruction and resources that are used for distance delivered experiences, which may or may not be computer mediated. For example, pwede yung textbook, pwede yung worksheet rather than computer mediated because not everybody has a computer. I suspect that though the reviews of literature tell us that it's always a combination of face-to-face and a distance modality of some sort, like a computer or printouts, because of COVID-19, the definition of blended learning might actually change. And so it might actually embrace more technologies in the blended learning. But to do that, for example, instead of face-to-face, you have radio-based instruction or TV education, and then that dovetails with a worksheet. That's blended also, but it's a fraction short of face-to-face. But because of the conditions happening to us now, that combination is probably more aligned to remote learning rather than the definition of blended. But I suspect that after this pandemic, or even during this pandemic, there will be new forms of blended learning. And the lines between these modalities, learning delivery modalities, will blur because teachers, if I know good teachers will always find a way to put these learning delivery modalities together so that their students will have something to study. I'm sure of it. So it's very important that we are able to provide lessons that can be accessed online, but also offline. And so children will be able to harness their abilities better. Let me reiterate that the more learning modalities are activated, the more effective instruction will be. So by simply dictating a lesson to a learner, that only engages one modality, which is the auditory modality. So whether you do face-to-face, remote, or blended instruction, if you are only engaging one sense, then they're just the same. Not one learning delivery modality is better than the other. No, none will be very effective. So put yourselves in your learner's shoes. How would you like that lesson to be delivered to you? Lessons that will be fun for the children will also be fun to design. And I think this is important. So instead of just dictating, maybe you can do ask them to do actions, you can ask them to do dances, you can ask them to be more kinesthetic about things so that they can even on their own alone in a study area actually do more activate more senses to learn a word. So one way to do it, if it's something that you are inclined to, is when you teach them spelling or you teach them a vocabulary word, you also teach them the sign language for it. So you activate both auditory, visual, and kinesthetic for particular words. And I think that is inclusive, no? And that's fun for children, as a matter of fact. No? Another way, for example, is to do a lesson, discuss a recipe, and then say, okay, make your own, and then show it to me next meeting. And so you activate other activities. So whether that is done with a computer, with a textbook, or in front of you in a face-to-face situation, that's fun. And that is an integration of learning modality and learning delivery modality. So I think that's very important. Finally, a little thing to consider also. Depending on the guidance from our government, we should be very aware whether our students are in no or low risk areas or moderate or high risk areas for COVID-19. Because, the learning delivery modality for these areas could actually vary. High risk areas, for example, will have really little choice but to do remote learning. Moderate risk areas might be able to do some face-to-face, but in very strict conditions, and mostly remote learning. But in low risk or no risk areas, perhaps there can be more face-to-face rather than distance learning, so that students are able to engage with other students, because learning is social. It's not just the curriculum that matters, it's what they learn from each other, and being with fellow children is also important. And so if these are possible, then maybe we should be able to open up certain places for face-to-face if there is no risk or very low risk. But again, I reiterate, that depends on what the guidance is from the government. The next is combining educational technologies. Educational technologies are tools and media used for the communication of knowledge, the development of knowledge, and the exchange of knowledge. Before we talk about technologies, I think it's best for us to remember that these are for communication, right? And this is the desired communication pattern. There's a message sent by someone, received by someone, and then immediately there's a response or feedback. And the more opportunities to do this cycle, the better. So as senders and receivers process or or think about what the messages are, they actually provide feedback and clarifications are easier. In one-way communication systems, what happens is there's a sender sending a message to a receiver. And this is, for example, what happens when we use books, posters, radio, television, speeches. There's really only one source of information. It goes that way, it goes outward. And there is no chance for the receiver to send back information to the sender. However, that said, even if the receiver is unable to send back a message, for example, a story read, the reader does not necessarily have the opportunity to send a response to the author, but most definitely there is a response. And that response, that can now be harnessed and nurtured with learning activities. But still, it remains to be one-way communication. So what we need to do is to create interactive communication so that there is more of this cycle where messages go around and around. Examples of this are chat, texting, email, telephone, and of course, joke lang naman yan, smoke signals. They are interactive, but they take a very long time to arrive. And the communication technologies now are much faster than smoke signals. But then what we need to watch out for, however, is that when the interaction is among groups of people, one, it is social, which is really good, there has to be a moderator so that the lesson or the discussion is more or less directed towards what is supposed to be learned. And that is the role of a teacher facilitator. Now, in activating technologies, I think it is important to remember that context is everything. Why is it everything? Because we need to utilize technologies and devices that students are already familiar with. And actually, better if there are devices that they actually own. Why is that a suggestion? Because that assures confidence in using this technology or device, but also because it is a signal that they can afford it. And that is a good context for selecting a way to communicate. So for example, students cannot really afford much data, but they can get data at a package that gives 3 days of data. So if they're able to get 3 days of data, they can download all the YouTube videos needed for the week in those 3 days. And they can access that information. And then during those 3 days are also the days where you interact with your students through a phone call or through chat. And it's very important to remember this because combining these technologies are important. We cannot use data all the time. It is too expensive. So it's very important for us to be able to leverage these technologies to enable the interactive communication. The fourth suggestion is exploring varied learning resources. Learning resources are the materials and equipment which are used for teaching and learning. These include um, printed matter, such as textbooks, library holdings, laboratory equipment, you know, science equipment for all the kinds of science, tech book equipment for the many, many tech book courses that we have, um, manipulative toys and devices for young children and even for older children, the math cubes so that they can learn math better and more concretely, sports and safety gear, art equipment and instruments uh, for for music and so on. Um, Equipment for agriculture. My favorite example is that in a farming in a farming course or an agricultural course, a Carabao is a learning resource, right? Information and communication technologies are learning resources, and web-based media and digital media are definitely learning resources. So, for example, whilst we can say, okay, everybody access web-based or digital media, we need to partner that with the device they have available. We also cannot ask students to to get a Carabao for themselves because that might not be possible. Or we cannot ask them to play basketball alone. So it's very important for us to design our flexible learning options with these learning resource constraints in mind, but also with the knowledge about what learning resources are available to them. So more and more, what we are seeing is that learning resources can actually moderate or temper the type of curriculum content we expect children to cover while they are learning from home. A good rule of thumb in combining learning resources and exploring varied learning resources is that in one study unit, for example, if your lesson is learning about the heroes of the Philippines during the revolution, then if we're learning about that, then what learning resources can be used that children have access to and combine them so that they can apply themselves on different kinds of learning resources. Even the assessment tools or the assessment requirements you will give, they need to show a variety of learning resources also because we cannot dictate because we don't know what they have at home. So it's very important to be flexible even in learning resources. So for example, we can tap into learning resources that are available online, such as DZUP, for example, radio on educational radio, the 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 learning resource portals of the Department of Education, the DepEd Commons, the Learning Resource and Management System that it also has. There are programs on Knowledge Channel, educational programs, which can be used. The second strategy is to pool resources. For example, um, we don't have to give all children gadgets. We have to give children who do not have anything some form of gadget. They should be the priority. And I think that's why, again, learner data is very important. Pooling resources will also help communities because it will lessen the burden of provision. And so it's very important for that data to be available. Local governments, for example, could shoulder the costs of connectivity and partnerships will help. And finally, curated learning resources such as these from the UP can also be helpful because it will give you ideas on how to put together learning resources. You know, there's nothing wrong with with studying how to do it. Actually, that's very commendable and admirable because all of us are transitioning into this system of flexible learning options. The fifth action is to rethink times for learning. Given the effect of the pandemic on our health and economic realities, it will be very difficult to assume that the daily routine of children will be the same across all households. In fact, that was hard to assume when they were going to school, right? In effect, we need to think about how to keep our schools decongested and how to practice physical distancing all the time. Um, this is an important thing to consider because we don't know when it will be safe for large groups of people to come together. So it might be a good idea to consider being flexible about the school calendar. For example, different grade levels can start their school years on different months. So maybe K to 3 starts in June, 4 to 6 starts in August, 7 to 10 starts in January, 11 and 12 start in March. Maybe things like that so that there is less traffic, not only in schools, but also around in roads, in public places. That might be something to consider. Another option is to adopt a year-round calendar. For, for example, a year-round calendar would mean that children are in school for a few months, and then they have a short break, a few months, and a short break, and this happens from January to December. In other words, we don't have the 6, 8 week summer vacation. We stagger the school year. And as we stagger the school year, we can also rotate who goes to school when. Some countries are already implementing this so that they can lessen the density of people around. Another way is to relax time constraints for learners, this time for learners. No? Learners should be able to choose when they will do their learning activities. Teachers may specify how long they have to do it, but then the children and the families will have to work out when they're going to do it. And we should solicit the support of parents so that they can manage the time of their children wisely or help their children manage time wisely. This has implications though on the kinds of lessons teachers will produce because some children might be able to listen to the video in the morning while another will be able to listen to it at night when there are fewer people using the internet or something like that. No? So it's very important that asynchronous lessons are always available. While we are doing this webinar live, we are also putting it out there for anybody who wants to watch it another time because that is when they are able to do it. And I think that's fair, that's valid, and that's important to provide opportunities for. Remember, we are trying to be inclusive. And it is also very, very innovative to keep information and sources of information available to as many people as possible. About 2 weeks ago, Dr. Oligario showed us this matrix. This matrix gives times of engagement that are recommended by a state board of education in Illinois. This is based, of course, on their experiences in their country and in their state. Doesn't mean that we have exactly the same, right? But it gives us an idea, a reference point, so to speak, about what to expect. How long do we really expect children to be engaged with a lesson on their own, with some supervision from a learning partner at home? According to this matrix, for grades 1 and 2 children, we can expect all of 5 to 10 minutes. And so, activities that you'll prepare will be about 5 to 10 minutes long. Um, for older children, obviously they can do it for longer, and also they are expected to be more independent learners, so they can do it for longer. But for some children who are even in grade 9, actually some of them have short attention spans also, so that has to be taken into consideration also. So again, this is important to consider. Now, that let's take 10 minutes for example. If developmental appropriateness for certain ages tell us that 10 minutes is your magic number, then we must think of lessons for primary school children that are 10 minutes long. That's your good time window, the time of window that you're more or less certain you can hold their engaged attention. So maybe you can have 10 minutes on a video chat, check up on the child, do a rhyming game, a language game, or an addition check-up quiz on the phone. Then maybe the next 10 minutes, when the child is able to do it, will be about answering a worksheet, also related to that lesson that you talked about on the telephone. Then maybe you will prepare another 10-minute activity where the child will watch a video or educational TV or educational radio that will reinforce what the child did on the worksheet and you talked about on your chat. And then maybe there will be a collaborative activity with the child, with a parent or a sibling. For example, more drills maybe, or maybe storytelling or collaborative storytelling. And maybe another 10 minutes to draw pictures based on the story or based on the activity. And so maybe you'd say, okay, you'll have these 3 or 4 activities to do. I'll call you again in 3 days' time or in a week's time, and you tell me about what you did in these activities. And so, but you plan these 10-minute activities because you know that's what the child can do. That's what the child will be successful in. And so, whilst you are being flexible, you're also being compassionate and you're being innovative because you are diversifying the education experiences of the child. And I think this is a very important thing to take away from this strategy is that we must we must really think about time and how we can use time to the advantage of the learner. The sixth strategy suggested is to adopt rotational shifts until such time that a properly developed vaccine becomes available. Face-to-face instruction will have to be moderated by health and sanitation precautions, and probably very strict ones also. So there will be disinfection and physical distancing for a very long time. Staggered attendance can be practiced in physical classes. Many learning areas require the use of laboratory equipment. Learners should have access to this, but again, the rules of distancing, disinfection, using the proper personal protective equipment, these need to be enforced properly. These are not for show. These are not just for talking. I saw that video of that mask being passed on from child to child as if the mask is only for compliance. The mask is for self-protection. The mask is to prevent disease spreading. And so we need to do this and take this very seriously. And so we can probably do some face-to-face learning or staggered attendance if few learners go to school on a given day, and then they are 2 meters away from each other, And then they work on those laboratory equipment alone, individually or independently. You, as a teacher, might be there to assist them, but again, you're also observing those distancing. So that would mean you need big instruction boards where they can see all the instructions you're asking them to do. So they hear you, they read the instruction as well, things like that. Or you can do weekly shifts, make students attend 2 days of school, then the rest of the time remote learning. Then the next 10 children, 2 days naman sila, then the rest of the time remote learning. So you can actually stagger, but also limit the number of days in school. Or another way to do it is to use this time to gather the children who have trouble with literacy, numeracy. They are the ones who will do staggered attendance in school, and they will be taught to read, write, compute, whilst their other classmates are doing their schoolwork remotely. And the time is focused on bringing up to speed the children who are at least at risk of failure or at risk of dropping out. So we can use this time actually to stagger attendance for children who are at risk. And I think that's an idea that people should consider. And but don't do it every day, stagger it, just so every child is provided instruction. um, there would be no excuse for a child not to be able to be literate and numerate, because that would practically be one-on-one or small group instruction already. And so there would be no excuse for them not to learn, because the teachers are there with all the time that can be given for their learning. Other countries have actually adopted 14-day cycles, but these 14-day cycles actually involve the parents. So for 4 days, 5 days, parents and children go to work or school. The next 10 days, they work from home or the children learn from home. So they do this rotation, because this rotation now allows the system to rest for 10 minutes. And so at 10 minutes, 10 days. And so this means that they can prevent the disease from spreading. The data is not in on whether this is successful. However, this is being adopted in some places. And finally, the final suggestion is to provide standards for learning options. We need to provide developers and users of flexible learning options with sufficient guidance and standards. This will help them create, select, combine, explore, rethink, and adopt the different educational aspects that can be negotiated and transacted based on the conditions forced upon us by COVID-19. I think that it's important for us to support those who we expect to create materials, because they need standards for quality, they need standards for individual FLOs, they need standards for small group FLOs, they need standards for assessment. How am I going to assess? These things have to be explicit. I think that it's also important for us to recognize that there is an unprecedented number of teachers and students who will migrate to flexible learning programs all over the world, not just here, everywhere. And so transitioning the education worker is the first thing to do. For any change to be successful, and this change is for flexible learning options to be taken on by the educational system, whether public or private, basic or higher ed. For this change to happen, there has to be champions. And the champions for this change, the carriers, the owners, the drivers of this change, will be those who will deliver the flexible learning options to learners. So we need to transition them well. And while we transition them, we actually are transitioning ourselves because we ourselves aren't experts on this. So we need to be able to help each other do this so that when they have transitioned successfully, or at least to a certain degree of confidence, then they can transition their students ably. And therefore, this means we must give each other time to learn, generous amounts of time to learn before we are expected to implement anything. We must plan, we must design before we deliver and develop and deliver. So I think that when we do this, we actually practice compassion, not only for learners, but also for teachers and education personnel who they themselves are experiencing anxiety. So we practice compassion towards all of us, all of the teaching education community, so that we can produce what will actually lead to better learning among students. Some time ago, somebody said, in the long history of humankind and animal kind too, those who have learned to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. So let's make the shift to FLOs so all of our learners will have this chance to prevail, even if they are challenged by a pandemic that has not happened in 100 years. So let us shift to FLOs so that learners can continue to feel that they are growing and they are progressing. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much for staying with us and listening to this webinar. I look forward to the interactions with you in the question and answer portion. I look forward to hearing about your opinions and your own comments and suggestions so that all the other listeners and participants in these webinars can benefit from your experience. But before that, I'd just like to thank the sources of some of the photographs that I used in this presentation, Pixabay and Pexels. I also would like to thank everyone who has been very supportive in creating this. The Dean, Jerome Buenviaje, Professors Ke, Maligalig, Lukman, Monterola, Jeanette Gonzalez, and Dr. Oligario for vetting the presentation and giving me suggestions. Thank you very much for your help. These are also the references that I used for this presentation. This will be uploaded. The handouts for this will be uploaded in our Facebook page. And I think they might be available also on the YouTube page. I'm not sure. We also encourage you, if possible, to fill out the evaluation forms. If you fill out the evaluation forms, I believe that in exchange you will receive a virtual certificate from the Secretariat of the webinars. So I encourage you to send us your feedback, knowing that this is a rather limited communication cycle. Your feedback would be very important so that we can prepare webinars that are more relevant and more useful to fellow teachers. So once again, thank you very much, everyone, for participating, and I will be very happy to interact with you with your questions. Thank you very much.